welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. My guest today is Andrew Sheves from CrisisDojo.AI, and forgive me for butchering Andrew's name when I introduce him as the podcast actually starts. And we're talking about something that's very topical that we've touched on before on the podcast, which is AI. And Andrew's going to run through with us a presentation that he created called the AI Advantage. So it's all about what you as a safety or risk professional need to know, how you can leverage AI, what are the capacities and the abilities of AI and how that's likely to change over time, and really giving you a good background and understanding of how you can use AI to your advantage. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please hit subscribe. Please give us a review because that's really helpful in spreading the word, and look forward to hearing some of your comments on social media. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Okay, welcome everybody joining us on the Safety Roundtable today. As always, it takes a minute for everyone to kind of get admitted into the Zoom room. And welcome to everybody that's watching this on the various different places that it's being streamed as well, if everything's working correctly this time around. So I'm just going to double check that things are working as correctly as they seem to be, or they should be, just before we get started. Yeah, looks like we're on LinkedIn. That's the main thing. We should be in a couple of other places as well. So let's get started then. Thank you all for joining today. Looking forward to this session with my co-host, Andrew Sheves. So I'm going to introduce to you in a second. And we're going to be talking about a topic that we have spoken about a little bit before on the Safety Roundtable, which is AI. But as I'm sure Andrew is going to say in a moment, this world of AI is moving so quickly that almost to the extent that if we put a Safety Roundtable on this topic 2 weeks ago, we'd probably have to update it this week because things are changing so quickly. So it's definitely a very fast-moving world. But I think the key thing is it's a world that is affecting us all and that we can all leverage. And so what we're going to try and do today is arm you with some knowledge so that you can do that in the world of safety, risk, security and crisis management. Just quickly, if you're unfamiliar with the Safety Roundtable, it's a fortnightly Zoom session, though, as I mentioned, we do stream it in places as well. Each time we cover a different topic, and the format is pretty simple. It's either me and a co-host, like today with Andrew, talking about a topic and introducing it, and then basically opening it up to a roundtable discussion, hence the name of the session. So it's very much interactive. We'd love to see more and more people getting involved, so do feel free to invite colleagues and fellow safety professionals along to a future session. So I'm going to introduce Andrew to you. He likes walking in the hills, hence this photograph. But he's the founder of CrisisDojo.AI. He's been a risk manager for over 2 decades. I've had him on my podcast before, and we were talking about simplifying risk management. I know that's something that Andrew really passionately believes in. And he, like me, has really jumped onto this AI trend, mega trend, I think it's fair to say, and is really thinking a lot about how it can be harnessed, leveraged to improve the work that we can do in the safety, risk, etc. arena. So I'm delighted to have Andrew on the session today. And Andrew, I'm going to pass over to you. You're going to do a bit of a presentation, and then we'll open it up for a discussion.
Absolutely. I will have to find out where you found that photo, but I appreciate that. Thank you for the kind introduction.
I haven't been stalking you on Facebook,
I
have
haven't
I?
been so on Facebook. Well, that's good to know. I'll throw up a presentation in a moment, which is really just designed to be a little bit of a vehicle to prime a discussion. And so, as Christian said, I've been working in risk and crisis for about 20 plus years after the military, and so always been interested in how we can use tools and things like that. And of course, this technology gives us huge opportunities, but also potentially quite a few headaches as decision makers for how we can put it to use safely. So I'm going to put up the presentation, which hopefully everyone can see. And just to give us an idea, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to see this as well, but if you could just pop into the chat, just to give a sense of how technical you feel, and that will maybe help me pitch this at the right level. Just pop in a 0 if you use technology but aren't feeling particularly technical. 1 if you're quite comfortable doing a few things around the edges, and 2 if you build things and play with tools, because that'll give me an idea of your level of interest, your level of how you might interact with this. But just to reassure everyone, I'm not technical. I fiddle with things, I tinker with things, I build things, but I don't come from a development background and things like that. So when I show you some of these tools and say I was able to do this, also read when I say that you can do this, because some of this stuff is not particularly complex when it comes to putting it into practice. Building it obviously can be a little complicated. So what I'm going to do is start with just give a little bit of an overview of things, and then really talk about opportunities and benefits, then the constraints and concerns. But I want to narrow down in the use cases just to give you some ideas. And throughout all of this, what I hope you come away with are, gosh, I could do this with AI for my business, or at the same time, or I should be thinking about how we might be using this, and there may be some safety or security or information security concerns that I need to keep in mind. So if nothing else, I'm just trying to prompt some ideas for everyone who's here. Okay, so here we go. Okay, just some initial thoughts and some ideas of where we are. I like and I don't like this image, because there's so much in it, and I'm not going to try and talk through it. You'll be able to look at this in your own time later. But you can see that on the bottom left you have 1800, and then you have now in big red letters, and that's how technology has progressed. But the thing I wanted to flag here, you'll see I've highlighted a couple of things. We had the first computers in the late 40s after the work at Bletchley Park. We then had the internet and web browsers in 91, so we could then communicate and use those collaboratively. And then in the early 2000s, Steve Jobs really put a smartphone in everyone's pocket, potentially. And so, 1, it's moving very quickly, but 2, if you're a corporate security officer, you'll know that smartphones in the workplace are still a thing we're trying to figure out. And so, 1, it gives us huge opportunity, but at the same time, it takes a while for us to work out not just how we can use it, but how we can use these responsibly. And of course, with AI, we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it at great speed. Although the positive thing is, clearly, when you look at the news, we're having a lot of the conversations now as this is being implemented, rather than 10 years after, as we're doing with social media. Now that it's out there, we're thinking, gosh, what should we do about social media? Once it's deployed, we're actually having the conversations quite early about AI, which is quite positive, I think. Just some things to think about as to how to approach AI. The reasoning engines. We know that most of the time when you say the dog wagged its, you're going to hear tail afterwards. It's not going to be blackboard or flip-flop. And so the reasoning engine is the same. The likelihood that after the dog wagged it's much more likely to be tail. The teacher wagged their finger, it's a different context. So they're reasoning engines. And they can be fact database. You can build a slightly different AI that is a fact database. Go and get me some information. But a lot of the time it's reasoning engine. And it's important to remember that, because we're not at the stage yet where it's sentient. And because it's reasoning, it's going to give us what it thinks is most reasonable, but they're not humans. And so they will give us some strange answers, which I'll talk about in a moment. They are much better than we are at some things. This is for object detection. This is around detecting cancer through medical imagery, have now surpassed human beings. And so there are clearly use cases where we should absolutely be using AI. But then there are other times when they're just not as good. And the model thinks that this is a very good image. The model produced this. I think the prompt is marketing executives at a conference on a beach in the south of France. And it looks wonderful until you start counting the number of legs and we get a bit out of whack. We can see that right away, but clearly the model can't. So there are still some times where it's just not as good. But it's quite convincing. And so again, we'll talk about this sort of this very confident inaccuracy later on. What's most exciting, but also potentially in some cases worrisome, there is no technical bar to entry for all of this. The newest coding language is English. If you have ChatGPT installed on your phone, you'll know you can just talk to it, give it a verbal prompt. It will transcribe that and send the prompt in. So we no longer have to learn to code, most of us. Some people do, somebody still needs to build this stuff. But for a lot of us, we can now interact at quite a high level, quite a technical level, just through speech. No longer has to be English because, of course, the translation is available. So the technical bar to entry for so many things has dropped, which in itself is very exciting. And this is this is no longer the thing that is just the purview of big tech. This is from a leaked Google memo from a couple of months ago, expressing their concern that the open source models, some of which were built for a few $100,000, were almost as good as the models that they had spent hundreds of millions of dollars on. And you'll see that a lot of the big projects that are getting coverage now are open source, which is very positive because open source means very easy to, but this is quite a shift in the power dynamic of who gets to set the tone of things. So just to throw out some broad capabilities, and then we'll talk about specific capabilities around risk safety. It's quite hard sometimes to think about how to put these into buckets. So of course I asked the AI how to help me. And these are just some ways to think about it. So again, when I go through all of these, hopefully you're thinking, gosh, how could this help me in my job? So they can generate stuff, they can generate text, they can generate images. So anytime you need to create something from scratch, they can help you in that respect for a purely creative purpose. They can do analysis. You have to train them to do analysis. You can't just give them information and hope that they'll get it right. Again, they're reasoning engines. If they haven't seen a use case before, they'll give you garbage. But if you train the model, it can very much improve analysis. And then communication and understanding. I've talked about translation already. They can summarize things, they can translate things, they can help us understand. So if you work in a multilingual environment, hugely beneficial because you have simultaneous translation of documents, of video and all kinds of things. So hugely powerful there. We've talked about medical imagery, obviously from a safety security standpoint, lots of people are talking about facial recognition, identification. I don't want to touch that. It is something that has been capable for a while, but we start to move into privacy issues. But obviously that is something that it could be used for, but it's probably not something that we're going to build ourselves. Research, you can do open research now that we have web access for a lot of the tools, or again, you can use your own database and do research analysis in there. So again, if you have a lot of data, if you have a lot of reports, we'll talk about models and private models later, but you could use it there for research. And again, imagine having essentially your own search engine, but just looking into your data and giving you analysis. And I think, as I said, we'll come back to that later. But importantly, with all of this, there is adaptation and learning. So both the general models, if you go to ChatGPT, it does learn from what we ask it and how we respond to it. But then our own models will be doing that. So you're not starting with a sort of thing that's frozen in amber or stuck in amber. The model you begin with will actually develop over time. So again, you may start somewhere and iterate over time. And that can be useful as these things become more powerful and more customized. So really getting into where can it help you, I think that these are the sort of use cases. And this is less about AI. This is just that it's a really powerful automation tool. It can do existing processes much more efficiently in a lot of cases. And when we publish this, the tagline of Crisis Dojo is it does it up to 100 times faster, and it literally can do some things 100 times faster for my work than I could do it myself. It won't always be the case, but that just gives you an idea of how much it can compress the time required to do something. And if we make something faster, more efficient, it actually opens up other opportunities in a lot of places. Can add originality. We all have our biases. We all have our own sort of feelings of how things should be, how things have been. So we look at data and we were a little bit narrow, a little bit blinkered. That's unfortunately just how humans' brains work. although the model is trained on the data that we have produced, it doesn't come with our biases. It may come with other biases, but at the same time, it could come up with new originality, give us some different use cases for things, give us a different interpretation of something. So again, if you're doing research and analysis, could come up with some quite interesting ideas. We can use it to improve our output. We've all had spell check for about 20 years. This is spell check on steroids. So we can take a written report, drop it into some of these tools. It can make it better. I've already talked about how it can translate. So again, quite a useful tool there for improving our output. And then it's just very, very good at handling enormous amounts of data. We've had machine learning for quite some time. What these tools do is they put a lot of these powerful machine learning tools in our hands. And so instead of having to go to commission a big team to come in and build a model, you can build your own. It will handle the data, it'll process it, clean it up. It won't get tired, it won't make mistakes, it won't corrupt your spreadsheet. And so again, lots of opportunities and benefits there. So if any of these touch you, if you have a process, if you have to come up with ideas, if you write things, or if you make sort of presentations, or if you handle data for use cases right away, where you could hopefully see some utility in your own work. Obviously, there's some downsides. Confidentiality is a big one. Both when we ask questions to the big models, they will interpret those questions. If you upload your annual report and ask them to summarize it, it will have that annual report. And if it's confidential, you have a data breach. If you have your own model and you share it with the whole company, what the CFO sees might be the same as your junior employees. And so you've got two levels of confidentiality to think about. You'll be aware that some of the models, they can't train them on live data. That's just hugely challenging from a computation standpoint. So that the data is old. If you say, what is the price of oil? You'll get the price of oil for about April 2022. But it won't tell you that it's from April 2022. It will just give you that answer. So again, just be aware that sometimes you're working with old data. We'll come on to hallucinations in a minute, but that's when they make things up. Unfortunately, it's very convincing stuff that they make up. But underlying all of this, I think the big thing that I would say is garbage in, garbage out. If you ask it a bad question or as a vague prompt, you will get a vague answer. You'll get the wrong answer. It's exactly the same as I speak to someone and give them a vague question. Can you make me a cake? I'll get a cake back. I don't know if it's going to be a wedding cake or a red velvet cake or a cupcake. Somebody has made me a cake, but I gave them imprecise instructions. So there's that level. But also, if you're training models, if you give them poor quality data, you will get poor quality results. And on this point of confidently accurate, this is down in this quadrant here. It's a little, I like pictures. So I made this little picture of how to think about the different models. These people all exist in reality. We've all met them. We've all met the BS artists. The problem is that it's very convincing when you speak the model. This is the hallucinations and this confidently inaccurate. So it will give you a very, very beautifully written answer to your question, which could be completely wrong. And so you do still need to be skeptical and thoughtful about what am I being told, hopefully in the same way that you are with a human being. But this is where this sort of very confident inaccuracy can come in. If it's the bottom left, the lunatic, it's obvious garbage. So that's easy to spot. It's the guy with 6 legs. We can see that right away that that's wrong. So those are two things to be aware of. What I would say for the top two is think about these two types of model. If you're going to use this, sometimes in the same way at work, you want a jack of all trades, you want a generalist. At other times, you want a domain expert. So again, this will help you think about, can I just use an off-the-shelf model, or do I need to go and use something very specific built to purpose? So again, I find these 4 quadrants quite helpful, but the main thing is just be careful of this bottom right, because it's very easy to read something, think it's great, and it's not.
And ChatGPT is comes across very convincingly, doesn't it? For example, just using one example, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate.
100%. And I was doing an experiment the other day trying to build something. I wrote a country report. It looked amazing. It looked brilliant. And I read it and I thought, oh goodness, it's complete garbage. But not, well, actually, it's not complete garbage. And the problem was that it was 75% accurate. So you really had to read into the detail to be to then notice that in fact what it was saying was not right. So I'll just give you a couple of use cases of things that I've put together as an idea of what you can do. Again, I would stress I'm not technical, so what you're seeing is the low level of what is possible with some fairly simple tools and interactions. I was looking at what the tools can do for us as risk, crisis, safety, and security managers. And I won't go through all of these bullet points, but you'll see the headings on the left do correlate back to some of the things I said about general use cases. So analysis, contingency planning, helping with reports, et cetera, but as of right now, today, and what is available commercially, and by commercial, I mean, you could go out and subscribe to it or get an API for it now, not, you know, could Google do this? This is, can we do this? Are these commercially available? These are where I think the tools could help us today. And so hopefully for most of you, there's a couple of things that will prompt some interest. For my work, and again, I do two things. I prepare companies for crises, whether that is analyzing their risks and running scenarios to prepare them, or come to help them when things go wrong. So on the preparatory side, I could see that there were these sort of 4 cases that would really help around exercise and contingency planning beforehand. I'll talk about the difference between contingency and scenario planning, but the planning side, but then building database for analysis. When I built these exercises before, when I build these exercises from scratch, and if you've been involved in the development of these, it takes weeks and it costs a lot of money. My friends at my former company in Deloitte, they do excellent work here, but it is quite time consuming and expensive because it is very, very specific to you. Sometimes you need an exercise quickly, and sometimes you can't afford the exercise. Because of the generation, the tools can help us build these exercises in less than an hour. They're quite convincing, they're quite realistic. And remember, all we're trying to do is give a team, hey, react. How would our plan up? What will we do? So that's all we're trying to do in an exercise. This shrinks it down from something that would take weeks to something that can be done actually in about 30 to 40 minutes. So very quick, very easy to customize, and something where you could exercise and train teams very quickly. You could also use exactly the same technology to take training videos that you would normally have to record yourself for presentations, maybe do it once, take the transcript, clean it up, put it into a model, and you could take a lot of your training material and generate videos very quickly. And remember, again, we're very close, very, very close to having simultaneous translations. You could do this in a sort of multilingual way. So developing this kind of training material, exercise material. This next example, this is from a couple of months ago, just around the time of the evacuation of Khartoum, and I was curious what ChatGPT could do. This is not on the latest model. This is on 3.5 from a couple of months ago. It did not have live access to the internet. And within about 90 minutes, I was able to come up with two very two very credible contingency plans, a road option and air option for evacuate people from Khartoum. If you've done this before, a lot of this time and space, logistics exercise, how long will it take to fly the people to their place, unload, turn the aircraft back, et cetera, what does it look like for the road move? It was able to give me some very, very credible options that I would have been quite happy to take and plan in detail. What I did notice was that this was an iterative process, exactly the same as it is when you're doing the planning. You look at something, it does or does not work, you either continue or you go back. I tried writing a mega prompt that was a page and a half long, thinking it could do everything, and it gave me a very poor quality answer. So again, one of the learnings for me was that sometimes it can work. You drop something in, the tool does what you ask it to. Other times you can use it as a sort of like you would an analyst. But contingency planning, again, cut the time down quite considerably and was able to help with that. So if you do this sort of planning, it could be quite helpful for that sort of thing. A little bit different is scenario generation. This is around, I don't understand this new environment that we're moving into, or I'm now working with a different company, different client. So it can give you some contingencies to think about. This uses a very narrow prompt. All I've done is put an interface on the top, but it puts a very narrow prompt into the model to ask for feedback. So again, just helping people come up with some new ideas that they might not be able to come up with themselves. And this is probably the biggest thing that we'll have to deal with, or the biggest opportunity that we have. When I was at the summit in London here last week about AI, this was the sort of big thing. There was very proportionally very little about generative AI. Show me a nice video or write some things. A lot of this was about the models and using data. So we're now taking these models, deploying them on top of a proprietary data set of your company information or threat data. Bloomberg has one on market data that you can then interact with. But instead of your data then going back to the central model, this stays within your ecosystem. So if you work for a corporation and you want to do analysis on slip, trips, and falls, and or how many near misses there are, that could be thousands and thousands of records. You could perhaps now put a model on top of that and do some real detailed analysis and see what conclusions you can draw. So that's quite exciting. And I think that's where we're going to be moving from a commercial basis. I think that's the thing that's going to be most interesting. And there's just a quote that backs this up. This is somebody from Hugging Face. They develop a lot, or they host and manage a lot of the models. And his point was, companies want control. They want control over it. They don't like the idea of sending information, something comes back, you have to trust it. They really want to see what's going on. And this also talks to the confidentiality issue. A couple of things for the future, and then we'll get on to questions. So collaboration, if you use ChatGPT, you'll have seen you can share the link. Very soon we'll have multiplayer modes. You could have 5 or 6 people in the same chat, which really opens up the opportunities for planning and discussion and iteration. So that could be quite interesting. Running models on your devices. So instead of it running on a cloud server, they could run on the device, which then means that you can be offline, you could be remote, you could work in places where you don't have great connectivity. So that's going to be very powerful for how we could use those. They're getting much smaller, but maintaining their power. And then agents, which really goes back to the efficiency side. So these are 2 agents. The one on the left, GPT Engineer, you talk to it or you type in your prompt, it asks you a question, it develops the entire code base for building software, and Agent GPT just chains a bunch of different tools together. But the point is, for the user, you are just interacting with one tool, giving it a prompt. Please book me a great holiday to Paris. And I'm really interested in seeing some art and enjoying some great food, and it will go and it will chain a number of things together. So now we have the ability to link several different tools together, which again could be hugely powerful and also highly efficient. But we're not having to do the work. We just tell it what we want to do, and the agents will work out what needs to happen next. So that, sadly, tools are available in a way that we can make very convincing videos to help train people. They can make very convincing videos to scare people, and bad news moves extremely quickly. You may have seen this picture. This was completely fake. It managed to move the US markets a little bit, and it moved around the news wires extremely quickly. And it took several hours for the Arlington Fire Department, which is where the Pentagon lives, to say there is nothing happening at the Pentagon. But of course, the correction moves often quite slowly compared to the real thing. So then think about, what if somebody makes a video of your CEO coming out and delivering some bad news? They spoof a Bloomberg interview and they talk about product contamination. What if we have the ability to overcome voice recognition? Because I can now spoof my voice, work out my mother's maiden name, some other credible information. We could now bypass some of our security controls. So it's not just fake news is a problem. You could honestly do this with Photoshop, but now spoofing voice and video does become a little bit more concerning for how that could be a security breach. Bad news spreads very quickly. You might have seen this story. This never happened. This simulation never happened. This exercise never happened. A drone never attacked someone. But again, it took 24 hours for that news to move around. And what this does, it erodes people's confidence in technology. So you know how difficult it is to get companies to adopt new technology. You will always have to against this additional credulity, because we should be skeptical of this. We should be concerned. But then you have fake news coming out on top where it does mislead people. And anything we can do, they can do better. Everyone has access to the same tools, and clearly the bad guys don't have any sort of moral concerns about how they're used. So that we are definitely in, and we will become an increasing arms race with how these can be used against us. Although, again, an idea of how quickly this is moving. This story came up this morning in one of the newsletters I get. Now we've turned this around. So this Darkbird is scraping the dark web, seeing what people are talking about there, seeing what's on offer, seeing what technologies they have, and using that to prompt people to improve their cyber defenses. So it's going to be an interesting cat and mouse. So I appreciate that was a lot, but just to shrink it down very quickly, hopefully the thing you will come away with is huge opportunities here, huge opportunities to be creative, to generate things, to be efficient for processes, and to handle large amounts of data. And I think I would expect everyone on this call, there's something there that I hope has now got you thinking, oh gosh, maybe we could use this, maybe we could use that. A couple of things at the end for, while we do this, how do we reality? What do we do about the potential threat that this opens up to us? But I'm going to stop now because I think I've talked long enough, and then pass it back to Christian, and then we can have any questions and see if people have some ideas or anything you want to pursue further.
Good stuff. Thank you, Andrew, for that. As you say, lots and lots of depth covered there. Let me. Do you want to just turn your screen share off, and we'll get people
turn this off.
Get people on so we can see everyone's faces. So guys, I've got some questions that I can ask Andrew, but I'd love to get as always on these sessions some interaction going as well. I wouldn't mind knowing, just in the chat, we asked about people's technical or view of their technical skill sets or abilities. Are you using this stuff already? So that'd be another interesting question. Have you been trying ChatGPT? Are you doing it regularly or infrequently, and why? What have you been using AI for? That would be another interesting question. So let us know in the chat there. And yeah, if you've got any particular questions. So I can see a question here actually from Bridget. So I'll ask this, Andrew, and then I'll have a chat to you about a few other things. What do you think is the best approach to regulating AI? Will either the EU AI Act or the UK pro-innovation approach do the job, or is a different approach needed? That's a nice philosophical question.
That's an enormous question. So I will do my best to answer as far as I understand. Caveat being, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not intimately familiar with the EU law. But my understanding of the EU law is there are two important things. One, the EU law was drafted or had been in the process of being drafted prior to December, which is really when ChatGPT exploded out. So it didn't deal as much with generative AI. What it seemed to spend a lot of time on was allocating risk levels to the different kind of uses. And so one would be, what is the benefit of police using facial recognition after a crime to find, hopefully, people involved, versus the sort of Chinese precognition, looking at everything that you're doing and trying to figure out, are you going to do something wrong? And really trying to think about the safe and responsible use of AI, actually a lot of it around the state. They did talk about models, and they have different levels of approval needed for models, and some very positive things about sharing the training database and things like that. So I think overall, my impression, having listened to several people talk about the European legislation, it's a pretty good start. And it's probably going in the right direction versus something like GDPR, which just threw a massive spanner in the works for all kinds of things and made it very complicated. So the EU legislation seems to be quite thoughtful. So that's very positive. Personally, I do think that it is not beyond the weight of all of these highly intelligent people to watermark at the source code level images, to watermark audio and a bunch of other things. Now, you can always remove that, but actually what that means is it bumps the bar up a lot higher for when I see the Pope playing basketball, and I think that's fantastic. It's good to see him getting out there. It'd be very easy to see that there's a tiny little watermark that shows that that's fake. Now, if I want to make a very credible version, I could do that, but it shrinks that down, I think, to maybe 10% of people could do deep fakes, whereas 90% of people are, you know that it's fake. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done legislatively around there. I think that's important. I saw a little bit of the Prime Minister's statement last week from Tech Week talking about innovation. I think that's great. The UK is obviously in a really interesting place at the moment from a jurisdiction standpoint between, out of Europe, but close to both Europe and the US. I think that will be interesting. I don't know how it'll work, frankly. And I think the US side could be more complex simply because of the way laws get made in the US. There is a concern that we've got to move towards regulatory capture, where AI is really, really gung-ho about regulations, which of course you would be when you're the market leader. But to round back, I think that the EU framework so far seems to be the one that's going most in the right direction for allowing innovation, but still putting controls and sensible guardrails in place.
Thanks, Andrew. I think it's a really difficult question to answer that, isn't it? Because the speed of change in this arena is just so vast, staggeringly vast, that just as in many other areas of economic and political policy, governments are on the back foot. And I think the challenge here is that governments typically move incredibly slowly, and this trend is moving so fast that I worry whether governments will ever fully be able to catch up with what's going on. And that's going to make the task of legislating and protecting us quite difficult, I guess. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I agree with that. I would say that, so code doesn't write itself by accident. And it's a little bit easy sometimes to take what I've heard Mark Zuckerberg say is, almost no one was more surprised than we were about what the algorithm did, which is absolute garbage, because somebody sat down and wrote the code that helped build these algorithms, that trained them. And so I think that regulation is important, but there also has to be a degree of self-regulation and also responsible use. So when we go to use these, let's turn this around a little bit. A company could have a policy to say, I want to record every keystroke that my employees punch into their computer, and I want to see how efficient they are. And you're absolutely welcome to do that. There's no expectation of privacy at work. You're using company machines, et cetera, et cetera. That's absolutely fine. I don't think we have to do that. And then how we use that information, we then need to be thoughtful about. So just because we can do it doesn't mean we have to do it. And so whether you are writing a prompt, whether you're putting information into the database to train it, and again, a human will select the data to train these models on, that's all going to happen at the human level. And like you say, the governments will take much longer to write regulations, and we don't really like regulations sometimes. I think a lot of this comes down to us, how we use them, how we build them, and then vote with our feet. If a company, we don't like how a company's doing something, we don't have to use it. And the nice thing is, at the moment with AI, there's lots of opportunities. So ChatGPT is accessible and easy, but it's only slightly more accessible than some other models. And so again, if we feel that they are not acting in a sort of responsible way, I think as users, we can just go elsewhere. So, but I think to your point, yes, the regulation is always going to be a little bit behind or a little too restrictive, and we'll have to work out what to do.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, that we can sort of vote with our feet to some extent with this. Just to put it into context, guys, if you're not aware of this, just on ChatGPT, I can't remember the exact figures, but the growth of ChatGPT has been exponentially faster than the growth of Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all of these other things. So it is growing at a massive rate. Just stepping back slightly, Andrew, from a sort of philosophical level slightly, I mean, how would you characterize this trend of AI, at a sort of helicopter level, in terms of the way that it could affect, or the extent to which it could affect this world that we're all in, of sort of safety, risk, crisis management, security? And as a follow-up to that, to what extent, and people have been asking this in the chat, to what extent do you think that it could have an effect of, for example, negating the need for, let's say, a health and safety professional at some point in time?
I am the least qualified to talk about anything philosophical. I don't do a lot of in-depth thinking about things sometimes. I think that so from our industry as a whole, and for a lot of industries, and I think I wrote some about this the other day, there are jobs that will be taken by this, and there are functions and activities that will be taken by this because it can do it better, frankly. And so let's use a slightly different example. If you are on Fiverr or Upwork and you make logos for $10 a time, and by making a logo, you go to Canva and put a logo together, Canva's already taken your job because I can go to Canva and do that. Now, I might want, if I want 100 logos, I might go because there's an efficiency element to that. But AI is not taking those jobs away, but I think that will be some of the narrative. There are jobs that take a lot of time and don't require a lot of skill that could probably be done better by this. Now, initially, that means that that job will be threatened. But at the same time, that individual has an opportunity then to say, okay, how could I use this and upskill myself to now do something faster or better or more in depth? To go back to Crisis Dojo, that is what I do. I write plans and I prepare companies. So I could sit with you and spend weeks doing discovery and come up with a plan and send it to you, and it costs you a fair amount of money because it's taking a lot of time. It's a lot of one-on-one time and building something to spec. Or I can push it through these systems and you can have a plan and an exercise and prepare your team in a couple of hours. Now, it's not going to be as in-depth. So if we then separate out, I need this thing absolutely tailored because I have a very specific use case and a complicated work environment, those jobs still exist. We still need judgment. We still need humans to come in and look at two things which are quite subtle, that involve emotions or sort of more EQ. Machines can't do that. So those jobs are still there. Interacting with people, that's important. They do a facsimile of interacting with people, but they're not really, they're just putting, sending words back and forth. So all of that still exists. But if there's busy work that you do, logging things and reporting things, if we can speed that up, hopefully what it means then is instead of a human punching information in, the human looks at the information that's been put into a system and then thinks, so what does that mean? What do I do with it? So I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift in how we work, I hope, because I hate putting in reports. I hate wasting my time just punching things in because it robs me of the time that I would want to spend looking at that information, saying, so what does that mean? And what do I advise my company to do based on what I've seen? So I think if we shift it away from that, I think that will hopefully be the biggest difference in a positive way. In the chat, people have talked about, can it do CCTV? Yes. Linnell and companies like that have been doing facial recognition, object recognition for 20 plus years. So that, that's all sort of already there. That's really just, we're talking about a slightly different approach to it, but that's already there. But I think that for a lot of us, I'm hoping it takes the busy work away, makes it more efficient, makes it more consistent, and then allows us to apply our judgment on top of it.
Yeah, I would characterize this and frame it in an argument of functionality versus vitality. So if you think about being a functional person and fulfilling functional roles within a health and safety department or team, then you're doing important stuff, but it's stuff that actually could be done quicker, faster, cheaper. And because it's functional, if people have the opportunity to do it quicker, faster, cheaper, then quicker, faster, I know the same thing, quicker, better, cheaper, more accurately, for example, then they'll do that because it's a functional task. Whereas if you can think about the more vital tasks that we need to do within our jobs, communication, soft skills, selling safety, all of this kind of stuff, the emotive side of things, then that's where AI is going to struggle to take over those roles, those tasks. And actually, if you think about it from a positive, you could look at this two ways. You could say, well, AI could take away a lot of that functional work, and that's a threat. Or you could look at it and say, well, actually, if I'm AI enabled, to use a sort of buzzword, then I can spend more time on the vital stuff. I can actually invest my time and effort and energy into where I can make the biggest impact. And by its very definition, what we all do on this call is vital, I would suggest. And therefore, if you come at it from that mindset, then I would certainly say that you should look at this as a positive thing. But I do, as Andrew said, I do think that you have to, you've got to be fighting on the right front foot, really.
Yeah, I agree, and I do like that differentiation. I see somebody has their hand up, but just I'll throw one thought in as well. I think what this is going to do potentially is, so everyone here has expertise, and we're limited in how we can share that expertise. We're sharing this. This is essentially one-on-one. If there's lots of people on the call, we're still doing one-on-one. And so that has a time requirement and often a cost requirement. If you're a consultant, there is a cost requirement. This allows us to do open up services, I think, to many more people, which should mean that smaller businesses have access to services they couldn't afford otherwise. I think companies in developing regions that don't have the same sort of budget or access to to expertise, I think it opens up a whole range of opportunities, which frankly I'm most excited about, because it's no longer you have to have that expert in your office or on the call with you. You can go and ask the chatbot as a start, and the chatbot's going to get you 80-90% of the way there. And then maybe I want to go and get an expert to say, okay, I've got this very specific problem. How do I solve it? But you know yourself, if you go to an expert and say, help me solve my problems, it's going to take them weeks to figure out what those are. So I think that could be quite exciting, because what it opens up to a number of different organizations, but the speed at which you can do it is significantly faster, and we do move in quite a dynamic work environment now. So I think that as well. So again, in some ways it could increase the opportunities for people in our field, and just like whether you're an expert or whether in-house, there's just more things you could do. So I think that could be quite exciting.
Yeah, I'll give another example as well, and then David will call you up to ask your question. So every year I do a survey of safety professionals, and if you haven't done it this year, then get involved. But last year I remember asking about blockers or inhibitors, and one of the things that people talked about was kind of getting trapped in the day-to-day stuff, like filling in accident forms and so on and so forth. So in other words, people are being trapped in this functional world within that context of health and safety. And what people want to focus on is proactivity, strategy, focusing on the areas like mental health and other things where they can make a big impact, but they're kind of being stuck by the day-to-day going on. So again, if you think about this from a positive perspective, with a positive sort of can-do mindset, then there's an opportunity here to try to, as Andrew says, the busy work, get rid of some of that busy work, get rid of some of this day-to-day stuff, either through working to eliminate stuff, or actually just getting rid of it from the perspective it's not taking up as much of your time, and you've then got the ability to do more of the stuff where you feel you can make a bigger impact. So you can probably tell I'm quite excited overall by this, but I do appreciate there's a lot of potential drawbacks and things we've got to be aware of as well. David, you've got your hand up. Did you want to unmute and come and comment or question?
Yeah, thanks very much. A bit of both, actually. Obviously, I'm at the sharp end, I think, as an educator, and this has been troubling us for about 18 months to 2 years. I've had fake work up to 4 years ago that's been fake, using technologies at the time. So the use of technology for cheating is not new. I'm going to make a real controversial statement here. Well, that's what I'm here to do. Anybody with a diploma or first degree based on compliance, and I mean health and safety, anything, ChatGPT, which is basically an updated version of Wikipedia, can do it for you. So if I'm a duty holder, just as when remember, for us, the big change is when the HSE documentation became free, and the idea of having a health and safety person that had the budget to buy books. I remember that. Some of you might remember it as well. That's what got you the job. Knowledge was power. We lost that, and actually a good employer can just look at it. They've got so much support, small businesses, through their insurance company. So we reached a point, I think, for that the duty holder has now got that knowledge. The expertise they want is the fire risk expert. They want the occupational hygienist. It's even more the specialist that Judith Hackett identified in 2016 in her article in, I think it was Irish Magazine or SHP Magazine, talking about her perceptions of this generic health and safety person. I think it is another thing. So what I'm seeing as an educator, I'm seeing work at bachelor's level and first level. I don't think it's on the agenda for NEBOSH at the moment. I'm seeing stuff that I believe is fake, and I'm calling people out. We're holding vivas, we're holding examinations. I'm seeing bits of work now where ChatGPT, and I've got the free version, it's inventing references, inventing citations. So the mark of the educator, the amount of time educators happen, I think we've got a big challenge unless it's something you are. So it's a tool, I think, for very much to help me understand something. It should be used as a research tool for referencing. It should not be one used for writing. People are cut and pasting it and copying stuff. So I think any qualification being delivered below bachelor's NEBOSH level, I think has got big questions mark over it. I think what people are doing, unless it's in the workplace related, understand the risk in front of you, I think it's a problem. And it takes us to master's level, where we've got to really start thinking, what is a master's level? What do we mean by master's education? It was about problem solving. It's all well and good, but we should not be even looking at compliance. And IELTS at the moment only understand compliance. They do not understand level 7 teaching. They're unable to accredit at level 7. They've confirmed that with me again. And I said, who do you recommend I go with? I met them I had a discussion with them at Birmingham, Christian, where you and I were together. They couldn't, well, we'll look at it. There might be other people we can help you with. Not interested. We got problems, and there are solutions there, but the pace is going. Many of you are probably further and further behind than you actually thought you were. And I think that's a scary thing. So for me, yes, it's a tool, but we don't yet know the damage it's doing. And the person in front of you, do they write their dissertation? Do they write their assignments? Do they answer their questions through ChatGPT or other software, or is it their own work? And do the accrediting bodies, and I mean HR, I mean other professions as well, how are they dealing with it? It's not just us. I think we're playing catch up, and I'm really worried about the standard of what I'm seeing. And I'm external at other places as well, and I'm seeing work that really challenges me. So there we go. It's good news going forward. We know what there is to fight with, but I think we have some real challenges when you're appointing somebody, what the interview has to be.
Yeah,
I think there are checks. It's a good piece of work, like a good piece of consultancy work, those consultants in the room and yourself, Christian, when you've done a piece of work, you're talking about it, you live it for that time you're doing it, you understand it. You don't have that if you've thought it with software. No. Just my thoughts and observation. I'm trying to put something together for an Irish conference later in the year somewhere on the challenges with having, I'm using ChatGPT as an educator, which is, our challenge is how to use it as a tool. Yeah. Quite right, Nathaniel. Yeah, that's right. But you got to get people in that probation period to do something. And remember, if it's just that, do they understand? So I've always said, health and safety management is down to duty holder management. Management will only get support if they need it. And they've got the technology to where the law is as well. I think it makes our employability of compliance officers, we have to be compliant and other things. Is compliance, is it being a policeman? Is that really what we want to be doing? I think we have to reflect on what do we want to be doing in years to come as well as individuals. It raises our bar as well. But anyway, yeah, that's what it was, Christian. It's a little point or two.
Good stuff, David. Thank you for that. One of the things you said there, I mean, you covered a lot of ground, obviously, it is a point that I make a lot, which is that information used to be very valuable. But even before ChatGPT, just with the advent of Google, information is, I wouldn't say it's worthless, but the value of information has dramatically plummeted in the last few years. And actually the value is in implementation now. So if you look at the not so let's forget safety for now, but if you look at let's say growing a business as something of a topic that I'm interested in, most people put their best ideas out there on webinars and podcasts and videos and blogs and Facebook and LinkedIn and whatever. They put their ideas out there for free because ideas are not really, and information is not really where the value is anymore. The actual value is in the implementation. So they're putting their ideas and concepts out there. for free, but then you need to pay them to help you to implement them. And I think if we use that analogy again for safety, risk, security, you may well be right that, you know, these lower level, if you've got this low level qualification, all of that information is available to the business. So then the value comes in, well, how can we interpret that? How can we implement it? How can we make sure we live and breathe it and drive it through within our business? So again, I think it's this softer skills that we've spoken about before on the safety roundtable come to the forefront. Any thoughts, Andrew, on some of David's comments?
So I have a complex view of qualifications and when we do compliance. And I think, David, you touched on some of this, but it doesn't really matter whether I got ChatGPT to write my answer or whether I memorized the answer and wrote it down. I don't know how much better that makes me as a practitioner. I think we'll always have the gap between the ability to regurgitate something in a test and actually apply it. Where this, I think, could be most useful is a lot of the work that we do actually comes down to culture, the culture of the organization, understanding people. That's why machines don't work, and that's why checking boxes and things doesn't work. And so I think that human part is always important. And I would turn it around a little bit, that actually having someone who really, really, truly understands an organization and then saying, go and look for evidence of these things, they might be much better at doing that job because of the knowledge of the organization than an external person coming in as an expert who understands that regulation or legislation or requirement, because they are looking for evidence that they will see, which is much more superficial, whereas the person that really understands the organization can go deep behind it. We have all been in an organization that is compliant up the yin yang. They have more certificates and, you know, whatever it is required than you can shake a stick at, and they're an absolute shambles. And so I think that, yes, it does open up the opportunity to cheat. It does open the opportunity to maybe lean on the technology to get a qualification. But I think somebody in the chat said that's why is a probation period, which we need anyway. So I think those are all problems, but I don't get super stressed about the number of certificates that people have, because that's an industrial complex in its own right. I think that what these tools could do, however, is let someone who really understands an organization be much more effective and powerful in their organization, maybe without the high level certification. But the end is still the same. The end is still the organization is safer, it's more secure, it's more effective. And so I think if we look at that outcome, it's not to dismiss the qualification issue, but I still think that there could be a benefit in there.
Good stuff. Right, we're coming up against time. I just wanted to share quickly about the next safety roundtable in a couple of weeks. And this is going to be touching on another big trend out there at the moment, which is this whole trend of ESG and values and millennials and all of this fun stuff, whereby if you're not living, breathing and walking the walk on your value of safety, then that's going to put you in a very difficult economic position, or that's the argument I'm going to be making in a couple of weeks. So I'd love to see lots of you on the session there, and we can chat through the importance of safety when it comes to actually being in a sustainable long-term business. Before we finish off, Andrew, I just wondered if you wanted to give everybody a quick reminder of kind of who you are, what you do, and then where is the best place to kind of connect with you and find some information, etc.
Thank you. So I think you know who I am is I'm a fiddler, you know, and so please take away from this that this is not a computer science expert or a programmer telling you about these things. This is just what I figured out in the last 6 or 9 months. So hopefully you can go off and experiment and see where that will help you. And you know, I've done risk, I've done safety, I've done security, I've done crisis. So I've got a little bit of an understanding of those things, but I'm excited about this, and I hope that it's given you some prompts. CrisisDojo.AI is where the tools are, and I will share through Christian. I'll put a little link up there. These slides aren't going to be super helpful, but there are some resources in there. I'll summarize and put those on the page, and then you can go and look at them, like that little grid about the 4 different characters of AI. So I'll send that via Christian, but it's just CrisisDojo.AI is where that is, or Andrew Sheves on LinkedIn/Sheves, because I have a funny name that nobody else wanted. So that's also an easy way to find me.
And I've been butchering the pronunciation throughout the whole thing, it just turns out. But there we go. Good stuff. Well, look, thank you, Andrew. Really fascinating session. Thanks everybody that's been thanking us in the chat as well. I'm sure we'll return to this topic because it's not a topic that's going away anytime soon. So as always, hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've got some value from it. And we look forward to seeing you on an upcoming Safety Roundtable, which are every 2 weeks on a Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.